joyful shout, the ladies they will all turn out and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bell would peal with joy, hurrah, hurrah.
Hello everybody, thanks for joining me. Welcome back to A People's Historian. My name is Jason Kishineff, and I've been trying to get a hold of this book for a couple of months actually. It's been hard to find a copy. It's called Is A Racket by Brigadier General Smedley Butler, who was, obviously a general, and I believe they considered him a war hero, but when he retired, he kind of exposed how war is just all about corporate profits and just the super ugliness of profiting from killing people in other countries. And so I think that this is a really super important story to share with you. This is the kind of thing that has me doing this channel. You know, we have to keep each other informed of the truth and of the history so that people understand when we talk about like Venezuela, for instance, when we talk about how it's all about profits, there is precedent, there is history to back up what we're saying. There is a lot of it. And so we begin with a quotation by Brigadier General Smedley D. Butler, 1937, said, "Why don't those damned oil companies fly their own flags on their personal property? Maybe a flag with a gas pump on it." 1937. See, the same shit's still going on. War is a Racket. Introduction by Adam Parfrey. Parfrey? Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Introduction: How a military hero blew the whistle on corporate malfeasance. There's a blurb at the beginning. In early to mid 20th century Latin America, the citizens of country after country heard the rhetoric of President Woodrow Wilson, but came up hard against the practices of American mining, agricultural, and construction games, and construction giants. And children, though they may have been in the eyes of both the paternalistic Wilson and the far more sinister corporate magnates, those people understood the game that was being played out within their borders. That's a quotation from Caleb Carr, the New York Observer, in an April 14th, 03 article spanking the interventionism of President Bush's neoconservative cabinet. So for a second I wasn't sure if it was 1903 or 2003, but it was 2003. Okay, so thus the introduction begins. The U.S. government thanked the efforts of World War I soldiers with a war bonus of approximately $1,000 to be paid late as 1945 from World War I. But as Great Depression and the Dust Bowl misery touched the continental states, unemployed veterans desired to have their bonus paid sooner. In May 1932, out-of-work vets arrived in Washington, D.C. to impress their bonus pleas to Congress. A pro-bonus bill sponsored by Wright-Patman was threatened veto by President Hoover and overturned House passage by a Republican Senate, as tens of thousands of Hooverville occupying vets demonstrated their discontent in a death march. Generals George Patton and Douglas MacArthur moved in on the veterans with the fresher contingent of the U.S. Army. 2 died, including an infant, and hundreds of veterans were injured. In MacArthur's successful attempt to gain control of D.C., the Bonus Marcher's primary upper-ranked supporter, Smedley D. Butler, the Brigadier General who was twice awarded the Medal of Honor and once the so-called Brevet Medal, when the Medal of Honor was not given officers. Known for his fair play to soldiers regardless of rank, Butler's support of the Bonus Marchers helped boost the desperate foot soldiers movement. The Brigadier General's disparaging of the mass media and the big business was particularly popular in the Depression. But those same big business interests, buoyed by the ability of Italian fascist corporatism to turn back labor demands in the restructuring of its economy, took special note of Butler's support from 500,000 veterans, which would have made an intimidating force against FDR and his hated New Deal and his elimination of the gold standard. But as far as Smedley Butler was concerned, I believe in making Wall Street pay for it. The bonuses. Taking Wall Street by the throat and shaking it up. It's funny how she just kind of moves in and leans against the book, isn't it? This is Hermione, by the way, as you may know. She's been in a few videos. As a Marine officer, Butler oversaw American forays into China, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Haiti, and this is where he picked up his frequently expressed opinion that he was no more than a bully boy for American corporations. Butler's skepticism about the U.S. government may have been partly the result of his Quaker background. During the Prohibition, Butler was made police chief of the mob-plagued city of Philadelphia in 1924 and 1925, where in a non-war interlude he effectively moved against open saloons, bars, and speakeasies. Mass magazines like the early diet and fitness periodical Strength, March 1924 issue, featured Butler's military-type run against the Philly gangsters. General Butler's iron grip. Courage is strength. Ditto unswerving purpose. That is why Philadelphia's crooks and bootleggers flee from the mailed fist of old hell's devil Butler. You've read much, perhaps, of the great heroes of fiction. Perhaps they were not all great heroes. Some of them may have been just ordinary leading characters, knights errant, adventurers, soldiers of fortune. Probably you've admired them, thrilled to their deeds, longed to emulate them, and possibly got just a wee bit tired of them, all with their calm, piercing, and various other kinds of eyes, their tremendous energy, and all that sort of thing. How would you like to meet one of them? A lot of Philadelphians have just had that opportunity, and a great many of them didn't care for it one bit. Of course, you know we are referring to Brigadier General Smedley D. Butler of the United States Marine Corps, who has just recently been appointed Director of the Department of Public Safety in the Quaker City. Written by T. von Zeekirch, Strength Magazine, March 1924. Aren't you cute? Yeah, you're cute. Are you tiny? She's tiny. In a 1931 speech, Butler recounted a story about Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini, how he had run over a child with his car and said as he moved on, It was only one life. What is one life in the affairs of the state? This remark caused a great commotion among U.S. authorities after Mussolini strongly denied the episode, and Butler was quickly placed under arrest and ordered court-martialed by President Hoover. For that? Pre-World War II worship of Italian fascism in America can be seen in the July 1934 issue of Fortune magazine, which celebrated the Italian corporatist state. Due to hostile public reaction, the court-martial against Butler was dropped entirely. The Brigadier General soon after announced his retirement in the Liberty magazine article, "To hell with the admirals. Why I retired at 50. That's interesting that in the 30s there was American fascination with Italian fascism. That's not really something that I've given a whole lot of thought to. I know that some people didn't think Hitler was so bad, but as far as actually admiring fascism, when he no longer wished to be known as a racketeer for capitalism, Butler became a widely quoted spokesman for constitutional American principles over imperialist American practice. Lowell Thomas, the famous journalist widely known for making a British liaison to the Arab revolt of World War I, Lawrence of Arabia, took on the adventures of Smedley D. Butler in the 1933 book Old Gimlet Eye, complete with end-paper illustrations of Smedley putting down revolting, barefoot, sword-wielding Haitians with pistol and rifle. The subtitle of this edition is not entirely accurate, as Smedley Butler was not an anti-war activist so much as an isolationist. And he died on June 21st, 1940, months prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Within the pages of War Is A Racket, Butler said that the U.S. should build an ironclad defense a rat couldn't crawl through. On the other hand, Butler also invoked against capitalist greed. I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the national city bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefits of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers in 1909 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. In China, I helped to see to it that Standard Oil went its way unmolested. Strangely enough, Reader's Digest saw fit to condense War Is A Racket as a book supplement. As you can see, it's not a very long book. Let's see how many pages. 66 pages and then a couple of pages of pictures. Lowell Thomas says in his introduction to the Reader's Digest version of War Is A Racket, even his opponents concede that in his stand on public questions, General Butler has been motivated by the same fiery integrity and loyal patriotism which has distinguished his service in countless Marine campaigns. But the view that opponents forever saw integrity in Butler's public questions overlooked the New York Times and Time magazine's public lancing when Butler revealed a Wall Street plot to seize the government. Investigated, confirmed, and partially suppressed by the McCormick-Dickstein Congressional Committee. The American Legion leaders and well-known men of Wall Street, one a major attorney for J.P. Morgan and Company, had planned the first American fascist dictatorship. And they're not talking about President Trump. Time magazine, at the time controlled by J.P. Morgan and Company, bet you didn't know that, I didn't, said under a first-page headline on December 3rd, 1934, "Plot without plotters," such as the nightmarish page of future United States history pictured last week in Manhattan by General Butler himself to the Special House Committee investigating un-American activities. No military officer of the United States since the late tempestuous George Custer has succeeded in publicly floundering in so much hot water as Smedley Darlington Butler. General Butler's sensational tongue had not been heard in the nation's presses for more than a week when he cornered a reporter for the Philadelphia Record and the New York Post, poured into his ears the lurid tale that he had been offered leadership of a fascist putsch scheduled for next year. Thanking their stars for having such surefire publicity dropped in their laps, Representatives McCormick and Dickstein began calling witnesses to expose the plot. But there did not seem to be any plotters. Mr. Morgan, just off a boat from Europe, had nothing to say, but partner Lamont did. Perfect moonshine, too utterly ridiculous to comment upon. That was from Time magazine, 1934, December 3rd. As George Seldes put it in his 1947 book, 1,000 Americans, any reader comparing the testimony in the committee report on this event must conclude that the Time report consists of distortion and propaganda. In his long out-of-print 1973 tome, The Plot to Seize the White House, Jules Archer shows how the New York Times denigrated Butler's whistleblowing and vastly underplayed the reality of the congressional inquiry. In November 21st, 1934, headlines said, "Hostile quote marks retained." What? Let me backtrack that sentence. First of all, because I changed the word "it's" to the word "in," so let's just... It's November 21st, 1934 headline said, "Hostile quote marks retained. General Butler bears fascist plot to seize government by force. Says bond salesman as representative of Wall Street Group asked him to lead army of 500,000 in march on Capitol. Those named make angry denials. Dickstein gets charge." The complex saga behind the coup attempt and the devious manner in which Butler was solicited to join the attempt to intimidate President Roosevelt into functional inactivity was strikingly described by Archer in The Plot to Seize the White House, Hawthorne Books, 1973, and a bit less provocatively by a History Channel documentary titled The Plot to Overthrow FDR, available on videotape from International Historic Films, www.ihf.com/stop/IHF/R547.html. That is a bit complicated. The title of that was The Plot to Overthrow FDR. Do a search of that. The most revealing details of the McCormick-Dickstein Committee report were suppressed in its original release, though the report confirmed Smedley Butler's revelation of outrageous corporate plots. It failed to detail the names of prominent corporate entities whose mention would have embarrassed the politicians they supported and the patriotic groups they helped form. Only after George Seldes released his obscure book, 1,000 Americans, did their suppressed names come to light in two revealing appendices reproduced below. From 1,000 Americans, 1947, by George Seldes, Appendix 20. The first fascist plot to seize the U.S. government. Seldes editorial note. General Smedley Butler testified before a congressional committee that several Wall Street bankers, one of them connected with J.P. Morgan and Company, several founders of the American Liberty League, and several heads of the American Legion plotted to seize the government of the United States shortly after President Roosevelt established the New Deal. The press, with a few exceptions, suppressed the news. Worse yet, the McCormick-Dickstein Committee suppressed the facts involving the big business interests, although it confirmed the plot which newspapers and magazines had either refused to mention or had tried to kill by ridicule. In the following quotations, the suppressed parts are in italics, and you can't see the italics. General Butler's testimony regarding the interview with Gerald G. McGuire of the brokerage firm of Grayson M.P. Murphy. Then McGuire said that he was the chairman of the Distinguished Guest Committee of the American Legion on Lewis Johnson's staff, that Lewis Johnson had, at McGuire's suggestion, put the name down to be incited as a distinguished guest of the Chicago Convention. That Johnson had then taken this list presented by McGuire of distinguished guests to the White House for approval. That Lewis Howe, one of the secretaries to the president, had crossed my name off and said that I was not to be invited, that the president would not have it. I thought I smelled a rat right away, that they were trying to get me mad, to get my goat. I said nothing. He, Murphy, is on our side, though. He wants to see the soldiers cared for. Is he responsible, too, for making the Legion a strike-breaking outfit? No. He does not control anything in the Legion now. I said, you know very well that it is nothing but a strike-breaking outfit used by Capital for that purpose, and that is the reason that we have all those big clubhouses, and that is the reason I pulled out from it. They've been using these dumb soldiers to break strikes. He said, Murphy hasn't anything to do with that. He is a very fine fellow. I said, I do not doubt that, but there is some reason for his putting $125,000 into this. Remember that $125,000 was a lot more then than it is now. Well, that was the end of that conversation. I said, is there anything stirring about it yet? Yes, he says. You watch. In 2 or 3 weeks, you will see it come out in the papers. There will be big fellows in it. There will be big fellows in it. And in about 2 weeks, the American Liberty League appeared which just about what he described it to be. We might have an assistant president, somebody to take the blame, and if things do not work out, he can drop him. He said that is what he was building up Hugh Johnson for. Hugh Johnson talked too damn much and got him into a hole, and he is going to fire him in the next 3 or 4 weeks. I said, how do you know all this? Oh, he said, we are in with him all the time. We know what is going to happen. General Butler's testimony of his interview with Robert Sterling Clark. He, Clark, laughed and said, that speech cost a lot of money. Clark told me that it had cost him a lot of money. Now, either from what he said then or from what McGuire had said, I got the impression that the speech had been written by John W. Davis. One or the other of them told me that. But he thought it was a big joke that these fellows were claiming the authority of that speech. He said, when I was in Paris, my headquarters were Morgan and Hodges. We had a meeting over there. I might as well tell you that our group is for you, for the head of this organization. Morgan and Hodges are against you. The Morgan interests say that you cannot be trusted, that you're too radical. You cannot be trusted. Therefore, Douglas MacArthur is the head of it. Douglas MacArthur's term expires in November, and if he is not reappointed, it is to be presumed that he will be disappointed and sore, and they are for getting him to head it. I said, I do not think that you will get the soldiers to follow him, Jerry. He is in bad odor because he put on a uniform with medals to march down the street in Washington. I know the soldiers. Well, then he will get Hanford McNider. They want either MacArthur or McNider. They do not want you. But our group tells us you are the only fellow in America who can get the soldiers together. They say, yes, but he will get them together and go the wrong way. That is what they say if you take charge of them. No biting. I said McNider won't do either. He will not get the soldiers to follow him because he has been opposed to the bonus. Yes, but we will have him change. And it is interesting to note that 3 weeks later after this conversation, McNider changed and turned around for the bonus. It is interesting to note that. He said there is going to be a big quarrel over a reappointment of MacArthur. And he said, you watch the president reappoint him. He's going to go right, and if he does not reappoint him, he is going to go left. I have been watching him with a great deal of interest, this quarrel over his reappointment, to see how it comes out. He said, you know as well as I do that MacArthur is Stotesbury's son-in-law in Philadelphia, Morgan's representative in Philadelphia. You just see how it goes, and if I'm not telling you the truth. I noticed that McNider turned around for the bonus and that there is a row over the reappointment of MacArthur. So he left me saying, I am going down to Miami. Testimony of Paul Comley, French. Testimony of Paul Comley, French, of Philadelphia Record, in the Smedley Butler Legion hearing. At first he, McGuire, suggested that the general, Butler, organize this outfit himself and ask $1 a year dues from everybody. We discussed that, and then he came around to the point of getting outside financial funds, and he said it would not be any trouble to raise $1 million. He said he could go to John W. Davis, attorney for J.P. Morgan and Company, or Perkins of the National City Bank, and any number of persons to get it. Of course, they may or may not mean anything. That may not mean anything. That is, his reference to John W. Davis and Perkins of the National City Bank. During my conversation with him, I did not, of course, commit to the general to anything. I was just feeling him along. Later, we discussed the question of arms and equipment, and he suggested that they could be obtained from the Remington Arms Company on credit through the DuPonts. I do not think at that time he mentioned the connection of DuPont's with the American Liberty League, but he skirted all around it. That is, I do not think he mentioned the Liberty League, but he skirted all around the idea that that was the back door. One of the DuPonts is on the board of directors of the American Liberty League, and they own a controlling interest in the Remington Arms Company. He said the general would not have any trouble enlisting 500,000 men. From 1,000 Americans, 1947 by George Seldes, Appendix 21. The fascist plot officially confirmed. 74th Congress, First Session, House of Representatives, Report Number 153. Investigation of Nazi and other propaganda. February 15th, 1935. Committed to the Committee of the whole House on the State of the Union and ordered to be printed. Mr. McCormick, from the committee appointed to investigate Nazi and other propaganda, submitted the following report. Pursuant to House Resolution Number 198, 73rd Congress, Fascism. There have been isolated cases of activity by organizations which seem to be guided by fascist principle, which the committee investigated and found that they had made no progress. In the last weeks of the committee's official life, it received evidence showing that certain persons had made an attempt to establish a fascist organization in this country. No evidence was presented and this committee had none to show a connection between this effort and any fascist activity of any European country. There is no question that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution when and if the financial backers deemed it expedient. This committee received evidence from Major General Smedley D. Butler, retired, twice decorated by the Congress of the United States. He testified before the committee as to conversations with one Gerald C. McGuire, in which the latter is alleged to have suggested the formation of a fascist army under the leadership of General Butler. Page 8 through 114, DC 6-2. McGuire denied these allegations under oath, but your committee was able to verify all the pertinent statements made by General Butler, with the exception of the direct statement suggesting the creation of the organization. This, however, was corroborated in the correspondence of McGuire with his principal, Robert Sterling Clark of New York City, while McGuire was abroad studying the various forms of veterans organizations of fascist character. Page 111, DC 6-2. The following is an excerpt from one of McGuire's letters. I had a very interesting talk last evening with a man who is quite well up on affairs here, and he seems to be of the opinion that the Croix de Feu will be very patriotic during this crisis and will take the cuts or be the moving spirit in the veterans to accept the cuts. Therefore, they will, in all probability, be in opposition to the socialists and functionaries. The general spirit among the functionaries seems to be correct, that the correct way to regain recovery is to spend more money and increase wages, rather than to put more people out of work and cut salaries. The Croix de Feu is getting a great number of new recruits, and I recently attended a meeting of this organization and was quite impressed with the type of men belonging. These fellows are interested only in the salvation of France, and I feel sure that the country could not be in better hands because they are not politicians. They are a cross-section of the best people of the country from all walks of life. People who gave their all between 1914 and 1918 that France might be saved. And I feel sure that if a crucial test ever comes to the Republic, that these men will be the bulwark upon which France will be served. There may be more uprisings, there may be more difficulties, but as is evidenced right now when the emergency arises and part difficulties are forgotten as far as France is concerned, and all become united in the one desire and purpose to keep this country as it is, the most democratic, and the country of the greatest freedom on the European continent. Page 3, DC 6-2. I'm not even sure what that reference means, but I'm sharing it with you. This committee asserts that any efforts based on lines as suggested in the foregoing and leading off to the extreme right are just as bad as efforts which would lead to the extreme left. Armed forces for the purpose of establishing a dictatorship by means of fascism, or a dictatorship through the instrumentality of the proletariat, or a dictatorship predicated in part on racial and religious hatreds, have no place in this country. Smedley Butler helped destroy a corporate fascist putsch. Never seen this word before. P-U-T-S-C-H. In the mid-1930s. But how long did that last? In the 1960s, all four primary liberal leaders were assassinated. In the mid-90s, a so-called Democrat president turned back the Bill of Rights and Constitution with a multitude of crime bills. And in the year 2000, Jim Crow laws were revived, and a presidential election was swayed by disallowing over 50,000 eligible African Americans to vote in the state of Florida. Corporations will not be denied their sway and profit. Regardless of one's political affiliation, war as a racket remains an astonishing reminder that America once stood for constitutional principles and not power-enhancing greed-mongering. That says burning Hooverville. Doesn't look like it's focusing very well. Doesn't look focused at all, does it? It says a photo opportunity I can't read it from here. A photo opportunity showing General Butler's desire to sweep government stables clean. In other words, he's getting rid of the horse shit. All right, thanks for joining me. Tune in to the next episode and we'll get started with General Butler's actual writing. We just read the prologue, the introduction, excuse me. Remember, if you enjoyed the episode, hit the like and subscribe button. Hit that notification bell, because YouTube has been known to unsubscribe people, especially people that listen to stuff like this. So we'll see you next time.